So starting in 1946, Gallup, that group that likes to take calls and does surveys and on these things we used to have called telephones, that were on your wall. Ask your parents, kids. All right. They call they do all these surveys every year, and starting in 1946, in their big kind of annual survey of Americans on opinions on all sorts of things, they added a question, and the question they added was, who do you most admire? So since 1946, there's been a list of the people that Americans most admire. And if you go and you look at the list, there's a lot of repeating names on there. And as I was looking at the list, the one thing I was struck by was nearly all of them were either politicians or politicians' spouses, of which I have no interest whatsoever. So I was curious, but it seemed to be the number one thing group represented. So I was curious, who on this list since 1946 is not a politician or a politician's spouse, of which there are three in all of that time. The first one in the late 40s and early 50s was Douglas MacArthur. The second one was Mother Teresa, very admirable people. And then finally, there was one year in, I think it was 1951, where the most admired woman was a woman named Elizabeth Kenney. And I had no idea who that was. And many of you are saying, well, how do you not know who Elizabeth Kenney is? Or you're like me and going, who in the world is that? Well, in 1951, she was actually the most admired woman in the United States. And who Elizabeth Kenney is she's actually an Australian, but we'll forgive her for that. She's a self-trained bush nurse. So she was a nurse in the wilds of Australia, who actually isn't known for that. What she's known for is coming up with a novel and unique treatment for people who had polio. At the time, the dominant way of dealing with polio and treating with polio, if you had an infection in one of your joints or whatever, is they would put it in a plaster cast and immobilize it while the infection was doing what it was doing. And she decided to take another way. And what she did instead, mostly because she was in the bush in Australia, didn't have access to things like plaster and plaster casts and things like that, is she actually decided to treat it with things like warm and hot compresses, and instead of immobilizing it, to actually passively move the joint on a regular basis. And she discovered this was a far more effective treatment for polio. And so eventually she came to the United States and trained doctors in various places on her technique. And if you've ever had the joy and or displeasure having to do any physical therapy in your life, as I have, you have Elizabeth to thank for that, because she eventually went on and kind of became the mother of modern physical therapy. And sort of invented the precursors to a lot of the practices we use in physical therapy today. There was a movie about her in 1946, and several articles written about her to the point where in 1951, a majority of Americans said that she was the most admired woman for that year. And then I think the next year it went back to who it had previously been every year before that, which was Eleanor Roosevelt. But Elizabeth Kenney got her year. And I was thinking about this, because I was thinking about this idea of being admired, and what does it mean to be admired? What does it mean to admire people, and who do we admire as people? And when we ask people in settings like that, we do tend to get these kind of larger-than-life grand figures who do amazing things, or at least in our minds we think of as amazing things, like things like founding physical therapy. So, some of you know that I actually asked you all yesterday. I sent out a quick little survey because I was curious if I asked you all who are the people that you most admire, and I kind of left it open you can interpret it as you wanted. What kind of response would we get back? And we got some good responses back to it. And I kind of think of this question as people sort of following in one of two categories. There is kind of like the hero category, which is what seems to show up in the Gallup polls, those popular, famous people who are kind of larger than life. And then there is the person we know category, right? There's the category of people that we admire them because we actually know them and they're either friends of ours, part of our family, somebody we've encountered in life. Care to guess how many people in the survey, what percentage of people in the survey listed like a hero type? What percentage in a hero type? We got to guess. 20%. Who said 20? Roy, you're a numbers guy. I would expect nothing less. All right. Exactly, 20%. Exactly 20% of you responded with names like Nolan Ryan, Dolly Parton, which I thought was a great answer. How do you not admire Dolly Parton? Lewis Hamilton, people like that. You know, sports figures, celebrities, people that we know who we feel are doing good in the world. Absolutely. The other 80% of you listed somebody who was obviously part of your life. And the ones that I really, really appreciated were the ones that didn't even have a name. It was just like my daughter, my dad, grandma, my mom. And of course, it was an anonymous survey. And then we asked, why do you admire them? I'm like, geez, I wish I kind of knew who this person was. They sound really kind of neat. And some of you actually listed other people in our church. Linda Young got a shout out. Alan Gibson got a shout out. By the way, we sung your hymn today. Did you hear it? All right. Alan was cutting grass about 2 months ago, and we were coming over here. I said, we're picking hymns. What do you want to sing? And he's like, I want to sing, Lord, you have come to the lakeshore. And I'm like, great, we'll get it in. We take requests, by the way, if you didn't know, especially if they come with money. Requesting a $20 bill in the box, you're getting your hymn sung. I can tell you that right now. All right. And then the only repeater on the list is actually really, really fitting today. The only person listed twice on the list, really, really fitting today, was Christy Duvall. All right. Yeah, I'm telling you. She's hiding all the way in the back, but I can see you. All right. And when asked for reasons why do you admire this person? Things like how much the idea of kindness came up a lot. They were very kind. I appreciate their kindness and their effort, their generosity, because of the support she gives her family, doing many things and things for others. She never had I like this one. She never had a bad word to say about anybody. Oh, she had one. She just didn't say it out loud. Whoever she is, I don't even know who this is. But I promise you, whoever this she is, she had bad words for people. She just kept them on the inside, as we all should. And I think that's great. And I think it's great that we as a church specifically like to single out those people who in our lives, and we like to single out people that we admire as those who are kind and giving and generous and those sorts of things. Because that really is, when we're talking about today, the spiritual gift of service. That is the gift of service. Oftentimes, what we understand as service in the way that Paul talks about it and Jesus talks about it in like today's passage, we would oftentimes use the word kindness. We would talk about somebody with the gift of service as somebody who has that gift of kindness and goes around and is in the world offering kindness to those that they meet. That is actually the standard that Jesus is going for. And we see that no more plainly spoken than we do right here in Matthew's gospel. Now, if you notice where we are in Matthew's gospel, it's always helpful to locate yourself in the story. This is really Matthew's last big kind of teaching moment before he enters Jerusalem and we get all of the events that happen during Holy Week, Good Friday, and Easter. So this is his really like last teaching moment with his disciples and those who are hanging around with them. He really is kind of summing up this whole thing. The 25 chapters before really can be summed up here in what's going on. And so he wants to leave them with some final words that they can hold on to and really kind of set the standard and the bar for who it is they are supposed to be. That is what Jesus is doing right here. He knows he's not going to be with them much longer. And he says, I need to set the bar for you and how it is that you are supposed to be and act in the world. And that's where we get today's passage. And if we really think about the bar that he is setting and what it is that he's asking us to do, that standard we were going to have to admit to ourselves is actually rather low, right? He doesn't say, go forth and do amazing, extraordinary things that will get you written out in history books. He doesn't say that. He doesn't think those are bad things, don't get me wrong, But he doesn't say, go and invent a new treatment for polio, go and cure cancer, go and, do all, whatever, go save a child from a burning building, though if you have that opportunity, you probably should. He says, go and be kind to one another. And at the end of the day, what we will finally be judged on, and he's very clear about that. I wanted to read both parts of the passage, because we often read the first part of the passage without the second part of the passage, where he says, go and do, and if you do, you will be blessed. And then he keeps talking, if you noticed, and says, and for those of you who didn't bother to even try to clear this rather low bar of being kind to one another, there's another thing. And I love that he does this. And I love that this is his final words to his people and his followers, because he really is setting the standard for them and all of us who will follow after. And I think if we're honest with each other and honest about what Jesus is actually asking for us, we have to admit to ourselves that the thing that he is asking for, though sometimes probably feels hard because sometimes we don't want to be kind, we want to say the words out loud that we have for people. Jesus is saying that's not how we're going to act, that's not how we're going to behave, that's not how people are going to know who you are. We're going to know who we are first and foremost by our kindness. Now, somebody in that message, somebody in that group that Jesus was talking to didn't understand that message and didn't quite get it. Because one of the people that was no doubt there that Jesus was talking to was Judas. And if you know the story about what happens next, if you literally flip over to the next chapter of the Bible, turn the page one page, you will get the story about how Judas agrees to betray Jesus. Now, Judas does this for a number of reasons, and one of the primary reasons he actually does this is not for the money. Oftentimes, we are assumed that just because Judas got paid to betray him, that's why he did it. That is probably not why he did it, or not the biggest reason why Judas did it. Instead, Judas had a different idea about what it is that Jesus ought to be doing and how it is Jesus ought to be spending his time, as did many people of the day. Remember, at this time, the Israelites are in the land, but they don't own the land. The Romans are there, and the Romans are in charge. And most people want the Romans gone, and they want to be in charge in their land again. So when a Messiah when somebody would pop up and kind of act in the way that Jesus did, and somebody would come and claim to be the Messiah, which several people in that time did, what the thing they were looking for was the new Moses. But they didn't want the new Moses to lead them out. They wanted the new Moses to drive the Romans out. And that is clearly what Judas wanted as well, and along with probably some of his other disciples. So really, when Judas probably no doubt heard all this language about kindness and being nice to each other and feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and all that sort of stuff, and I'm sure Judas is thinking in his mind, that's all well and good, Jesus, that all sounds nice, but we got bigger problems. Right? We got bigger things we got to deal with. We got these Romans we got to get out of here. That's what we should be spending our time. That's the big project we should be about. And Jesus, you are this great leader. You should be helping us do that. And Judas's assumption is that if it comes down to it, if he helps the Romans arrest Jesus, that's going to provoke Jesus into finally leading this overthrow that he very clearly wants them to do. Now, if we know the rest of the story, we know that's not how it goes. Jesus does not lead any kind of military victory or anything like that. That's not Jesus' job at that time and in that place. And instead, Jesus continues to do the thing that he told everyone else that they needed to do. He continues to choose kindness and sacrifice. And of course, again, we know where the story goes. Kindness is the thing that Jesus asks us for. Service is the thing that Jesus asks us for. And I think if I give you a minute, I'm going to give you a minute. I want you to think about a time when someone was kind to you. Take a moment and think about a time someone was kind to you. It may be the time when somebody in front of you paid for your drink at Starbucks. It may be the time that somebody helped you carry something or pick up something that you dropped. It may be a time when somebody just had a kind word for you at a time you needed to hear it. But my guess is most of us are not going to have a hard time thinking of a time or two that somebody was kind to us. Sometimes we don't even know who the person was. Sometimes they truly are random acts that enter into our lives. Sometimes I think the people who are showing us kindness don't even know in that moment they are doing that. I can think of several times where people have showed up in my life with the right word, offering the right thing at a moment when they didn't realize it was the one thing I actually really, really needed to hear. They might have just thought of it as a kind word, but to me it was an assurance that I needed. We remember kind acts because they are important. And my guess is it's also probably easier for us to remember the kindness that people have done to us than it is to remember the kindness that we offer to others. For some reason in our minds, we don't seem to value the kindness that we show others as much as the kindness that we receive. But for whatever the reason is, however it is that it happens, this is what we are called to do in big and small ways. Now, several years ago, I came into my office at my last church, and there was a note on my door, on this whiteboard I used to keep on my door. And what this is a note from a group of ladies who would once a month. So Billings, Montana is home to lots of things, a lot of great and amazing things. One of the things that Billings, Montana, right off downtown, is home to is the Montana State Women's Prison. Why it's right off downtown, I couldn't tell you, but it is. And it meant that it was also fairly near our church. And so after we eventually developed a ministry where a small group of ladies would go there and offer worship once a month to the women, anybody who wanted to come at the prison, which is a bit of a task, I will tell you. But they did it and they loved it and they enjoyed it. And one morning I came in on Monday morning, and this was the thing that I realized. They were very excited that they actually had 18 people there, which actually is a really big number for drawing a crowd for a voluntary activity at the prison, and they were very excited about it. And I remember looking at that note, and then later that week, I was going to a clergy event. And one of the things that, clergy get to do is they get together, and we like to share. Now, clergy are interesting folk, let me just tell you that. I had to learn that rather quickly. And one of the things that I've learned very quickly about clergy is that when clergy get together, believe it or not, one of the things they love to do more than anything is complain. I'm not a big complainer. But one of the things, and part of it is it's safe space, and we all kind of know what it's going through. And I imagine it's sometimes what's similar that happens, in the teacher break rooms and places like that, or, at the nurse's station, or, those kind of things. You know how people are. So you get clergy together, and, that's oftentimes like the first kind of like, hey, how you doing? Well, let me just tell you. Okay. But this event was a little something different, and the person organizing the time together, got us together in these little groups, and he's like, can you share something good that is happening, in your life and in your ministry? Share something that's exciting, or share something that you're, proud of, whatever. He's like, start off by sharing something good with one another. So I'm in this room. I'm still fairly new in ministry and new to the area, so I do not volunteer to go first. And I'm listening. People are kind of going around, and some folks are having to think really, really hard to think of something good. It goes around, and it gets to me, and all I can think of was this note. And I said, well, actually, earlier in this week, I had a note and from our ladies who do this ministry, and they had 18 people, and they were really excited. And one of the guys was like, wait a minute. What are you doing? I said, oh, we got this group of ladies. They go to the prison, and they offer worship, and they were very excited. They're like, do you go? And I'm like, no, I don't go. I kind of go because they were taking my sermons on video with them for a while. Then they actually started to preach themselves. It was great. But I was like, no, I don't go. The ladies go because it's a women's prison. So we send the women. Like you do. And they're like, and they just started quizzing me on it, like, well, how many people go? And I started explaining it to them. I was like, well, how does that work? And I'm like, well, you can't bring much into a prison, believe it or not. But, we got permission to bring in an iPad, so we put music on there, and they go and they do this thing. And they go around. And then we finally get to the big session, and then somebody stands up, and they're talking about stuff, and they're like, hey, we think Jeremy should share about that thing that he's doing. And I'm like, well, I'm not doing it. So I get up and I share, and everybody looks at me like, what's going on? Like, and it was this interesting thing that kept going. I'm like, I told Dane yesterday, we were driving around, I said, I have to decide how much of a rant I'm going to go on and off on in a sermon here. I'm trying to keep it to a minimum. And at first I was like excited. It was nice, I'm new in ministry. People want to know what we're doing. That sounds great. And then all these questions afterwards and how, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, and then I was like, I was excited. Then I had this overwhelming sense actually of sadness because I'm like, what we're doing is great, but it shouldn't be this exciting, right? This is what the church is supposed to do. It's right there. He literally said, visit the prisoner. Like it's in the list. Like, it's not exciting. I mean, really, I thought the same thing when people got all excited about the free store. And I'm like, well, you give away clothes? Like, of course we give away clothes. It's in the list. Clothe the naked. Now, I'm glad people don't actually come into the free store naked, but it's right there. This is the low-hanging fruit. What are you talking about? And it was one of those things like, this should not be this unique. And I had that experience there, and I've had that experience all through ministry. I've had it here several times, lest you think that I don't like you all too. But it was about 6 months ago, I was meeting with a clergy friend here, and he says, oh, I'm really upset at you. And I'm like, okay, why? And he's like, well, I saw on Facebook when you took those the fire buckets up to the fire victims in Montana. I'm like, uh-huh. He's like, well, we tried to do that at our church, and we were told that we couldn't. I'm like, by who? Who told you? Like, who did you ask? Jesus? Like, you don't need permission to do nice things for people. That's not how this works, right? Again, Jesus gave us a list. I don't think fire buckets was on the list, but you can it should be. I like that. You can get there, right? It's one level down. And as I was like, what do you mean? Who did you ask? Like, don't ask, just do, right? If you have the opportunity to be kind, if you have opportunity to be in service, if you have the opportunity together to do good in the world, it is literally what we are called to do. It was literally the last thing Jesus tried to remind us of on his way out the door, was don't forget to be nice to each other and do what you can for one another. Right? Recently, we were at a school board thing. We talked about this. I gave you an opportunity last week to be in service, if you remember. So a couple of weeks ago, I was at a school board thing, and one of the things that was happening was one of the principals at our new school was presenting, and he's saying, "Hey, we're not doing school supplies this year because we don't know what to ask the kids for, so we're asking for a fee instead." And I came up to him afterwards. I said, "That sounds good. I understand why you're doing that. Do you have any families for whom that fee is going to be a hardship?" And he said, yeah, we probably are going to have six to eight, we think, families that are going to struggle to have that fee. And I said, okay, well, when you get a final number, let me know. We'll take care of it. And he looked at me kind of strange. And I said, no, but our church will take care of it. And he looked at me kind of strange. And he's like, okay. And then we went on with the meeting, and I got with him later. I'm like, I'm serious. Once you get a number, let me know. He's like, okay, I'll get the number. You check with your church, and then we'll figure it out. And I'm like, check with my church? I don't think I'm going to do that. And to be fair, I did not ask Lee, our missions coordinator. I did not ask Alan, our director of our thing, and I sure as heck didn't ask our treasurer. And I'm like, if we can't take care of this, if we can't do this, if this isn't the simplest thing I'm going to do that week, then we got other problems. And of course, it was the simplest thing I did that week. And I barely got out of the administrative council meeting with any money left to collect from you all, but you all stepped up in a good way. Thank you. And earlier this week, Jim got to deliver a check down to Elwell, and hopefully they were excited about it. And the only other thing that I asked him actually when I was talking with him was, please just don't make a big deal out of it. You don't need to tell them. Please do not. The families don't need to know where it came from. They just need to know that it was taken care of and that their community took care of them and that somebody out there loves them. That's all they need to know. We don't need to know. We will know. Jesus will know. That's all that needs to know. Good. Everyone's nodding. All right. I'm not going to be in trouble later. But this is what we do, right? This is what the outpost is for. We talk about the church as the outpost of God's kingdom. This is what it's for, right? We are here to serve each other. We are here to serve God. We are here to serve and love our neighbors in any and all the ways that we can. And no, we can't solve all the giant, biggest problems of the world. I wish we could, right? We can't do all of the things, but there are things we can do. We can't do everything, but we can do something. And our job is to find the somethings that we can do. And Jesus is very, very clear with the disciples, is there is something you can do. Jesus knows at that time and at that place, he is about to go do something that we cannot do for ourselves. Jesus is about to go and show us how far kindness goes. He's about to go to the cross. He's about to die for our sins. And he's about to come back to life to show us something really important about God and what God feels and thinks about us. And he knows he has to do it because we can't. And so he does. And he does do the thing that only Jesus can do. But before he does, he makes sure that everyone around him and all of us who are here 2,000 years later would know that just because we can't do the thing that Jesus did doesn't mean there isn't anything for us to do. The thing for us to do is to accept the gift and the grace that we are offered through Christ, and then to try to straddle the rather low bar of being kind to one another, those that we know and those that we don't, and to find any and every opportunity we can to be in service with each other. And if that means if we see a naked person, we should probably put some clothing on them, please. And if we see a hungry person, we should see if we can't find them some food. And if we see some of our neighbors, either in this state or a state far away, who've gone through something trying, if we can offer them a bucket full of supplies to make it a little easier to get back to normal, then we do that. When we see a kid in need of some pencils and crayons for school, we take care of that. Whatever it is, whatever opportunity God gives us to be in service to one another, we take the opportunity. That's what we're called to do. That's what Christians do. And the church is supposed to be here to help us do it. So I confess, I got a little short with my brothers and sisters and fellow pastors in that time and in that place. And I got a little testy with them for being just a little too excited about what we were doing, because I was thinking, really, we all should just be doing this. This should not be exciting. This is what we're about. This is what we're for. So the gift of service, that amazing spiritual gift of service, is about looking around at the world, seeing what little thing we can do, and actually taking the time and the initiative to do it. And that is why I say that if I can pick one gift above all, of all of them that we are going to talk about through this whole series, if I can think of one gift above all that I see demonstrated over and over and over again, yes, in the wider church at large, but especially in this church here, if there's the one that we probably know better than most, it's the gift of service. And in my book, and I think Jesus' book too, it is also probably the most important. Amen.